and welcome to this episode of Futures, the podcast series brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. I'm Emma Scott and I'm flying solo today. Sam can't be with us, but I just want to give a little bit of context to our episode today. And so for this episode, we're focusing on the core themes that came out of the 2024 salary guide. For those unaware of our salary guide, we work in partnership with recruitment expert Hays. It's an in-depth look at the latest trends in procurement, talent, recruitment and retention. It's based off around 5,000 responses from procurement professionals around the world, and it's an amazing resource. I would definitely suggest go and check it out. We'll put the link to it in the description so you can go and find out. If nothing else, go and check your salary and benchmark it on the calculator so you can find average salaries for your role in your region. So we've got two core themes that we want to focus on for this episode. One is inclusivity, looking at the importance of inclusive hiring and talent retention. And the second is diversity. By this, we'll be exploring why diverse skills and perspectives, procurement superpowers I like to call them, are important to the future success of your function and the wider profession as a whole. So let's get started. I'm delighted to welcome Dave Jones, Head of Procurement, IT and Digital at leading telecoms provider Virgin Media and O2, and Dan Robertson, MD at specialist ED&I consultancy Fairer Consulting. Hi both, thanks ever so much for joining us today. Dave, do you want to start by introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emma. Great to be here. So I've been in procurement for quite a long time. I've been at Virgin Media O2 for about 8 months. Current role, look after IT and digital. For those who don't know us, we came together about 3 or 4 years ago, bringing two great telecoms brands, Virgin Media and O2, together in the UK. And my role is to manage all the IT spend. And before that, I've worked in a lot of different sectors. I'm also dyslexic as well. So I champion really bringing diverse, different ways of thinking and different ways of doing things into procurement. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me.
No, it's really lovely to finally speak to you. We've talked so much virtually on LinkedIn. Me being dyslexic as well, I follow some of your posts with great interest. And Dan, do you want to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background, your role, and what Fairer Consulting do?
Yeah, no, great. And, like Dave, really happy to be here. I'm the global MD of Fairer Consulting. So Fairer, we're based in the UK, but we operate globally. And we're effectively strategic advisors on diversity, equity and inclusion to a whole broad range of different global businesses across lots of sectors and the rest of it. I've actually spent about 25 years of my life in D&I. And you can imagine over that period of time, things have changed quite significantly. But these days I tend to spend, most of my life with global leaders thinking about how do we actually navigate this conversation? Because you can imagine 25 years ago when I was doing things around race relations and the Race Equality Act and the Amendment Act, things were probably a lot simpler. We now live in a world of identity politics, and I'm sure we'll come on to some of this. But I think our job is becoming much more complex. So we need to think about how do we navigate all that complexity.
Fabulous to have you both here with us today, so thanks for that. So our annual salary survey, like I previously mentioned, it really allows us to shine a light on not only how much people should get paid and benchmark your salary, but really shine a light on important topics such as ED&I. So it's something that's really important out there. And the data shows that the majority of organisations believe that they are diverse and inclusive, but fewer than half of our respondents have said that ED&I has been made a top priority. So, do we need to start thinking differently about this, making it a priority? Dan, if you can kick off with us here.
Well, first of all, I actually think what we need to do is probably a basic thing, but take a step back and say, well, what are we talking about here? Because people talk about D&I or ED&I as if it's one thing. And actually, they're fundamentally different, but of course they connect. So obviously, diversity is just about all of the differences we have. And I think organizations have an approach to diversity, but the reality is their approach to diversity is actually one of representation. So it's really about saying, how do we get more, for example, women or people of color in an organization, and how do we move them up? If you look at global trends, there's not much representational activity beyond things like race and gender. So most corporates have metrics and targets on those, but they wouldn't have targets on LGBT, etc., etc. And then inclusion is obviously something different. So there's a conversation about saying, okay, well, as we increase our level of a difference, what is our strategic plan around inclusion and belonging and all those sorts of things, right? So, what are the metrics that we want to put into place around that? And I think some organizations are better than others of understanding the strategic difference, but the strategic connection between the two, others are less so. I do think, though, that there's one big thing missing from the picture, and that's what I call corporate cohesion. The way that organizational structures are set up at the moment are, we basically have this historical legacy. So, we have network groups, women's groups, LGBT groups, disability groups, etc. Those things have served their purpose and they're still useful. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate that we remove those, but I do think it's time to pause and reflect and say, as the world outside is getting complex and the internal environment is getting complex, how do we move towards a narrative of connectivity and what I call corporate cohesion, which I think is going to be a critical factor to accelerate inclusion. So I think the starting point is making sure we're clear on those points before we decide what the priorities are and where we go with them.
Absolutely. I think it's too common that we just group the ED and I together as one thing without separating those individual elements out and looking at them separately. And now I totally agree with you that. And also the how the dialogue moves on. So how do you keep your view of ED and I fresh to make sure that you are taking account of things that happen in modern society? Dan, do you think organizations are putting this on a back burner and perhaps even deprioritizing ED&I just because there's so much else going on and other priorities?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. And I think, obviously there's the context of the recent elections in the US. I think it actually changes depending on the market you're in. I think in the US, there's definitely a rolling back of D&I efforts for sure. I don't see that in the UK. I think the UK, we're much more like mature as a market. I think UK corporates understand the importance of it, same across Europe and the rest of it. So my advice to colleagues listening to this would be, don't be swayed by what's happening in the US market at the moment. I think it's a cycle, and I think we will come out of that cycle. The other thing which I think is interesting is actually many corporates in the US who are our clients are not deprioritizing it. They're slightly renaming it. So they're talking about perhaps culture, or I know some higher education institutions are talking about accessibility. So there's a slight rebadging of it to get around the kind of politics as opposed to a complete deprioritization, which we might see in the headlines.
Good to hear. Dave, what do you think about relating this back to procurement? What do you think as a profession? Why do you think procurement creates opportunities for diverse perspectives to thrive? Can you share some of your own experiences on this?
We've got a great opportunity as a profession actually because we influence a lot of the external spend, and if we think about the majority, the majority of a company's money once goes to external suppliers once we take wages out of the equation. So creating opportunities for suppliers to make it easier to work with an organization, break down barriers, etc., is one thing we can do. With our own profession, looking at the stats, I think procurement is quite a diverse profession at an entry point. Like we do attract pretty diverse groups, particularly on a global basis. But then when we get into more senior roles, the diversity reduces and reduces, and that's a real problem because we're not getting different ideas and different perspectives coming through. So what could we do to kind of address that? Well, I think the key thing we need to remind ourselves about is listen, ask questions, and be open about the problem. Ask people that are in minority groups and get their feedback, and then put conscious plans in place to address it. That's the only thing we can do. The main thing to do is acknowledge it and listen, and also accept that we're not going to get everything right as well. Sometimes people worry about doing the wrong thing. The only thing you can do wrong, I think, is nothing. And a lot of people are doing nothing because they're scared of doing the wrong thing.
No, I agree with you, and I think it's making it at the forefront of people's minds and being cognizant of this, rather than it being an annual piece of training that you have to do, through your HR training or a policy that you know about that sits on an intranet somewhere. Just being kind of mindful and cognizant, just creating that culture where people are just more thoughtful and mindful of it. But Dave, as an experienced procurement practitioner and now in a managerial role, what you're seeing, are there still barriers to entry? And what do you think they are? Are these challenges specific to procurement, or do you think it's a wider issue that other professions are also seeing?
Drilling down to procurement, particularly, what would be the barriers? There's opportunity, creating opportunity for people to progress in the organisation, um, helping people with confidence as well, to find those opportunities and progress. Mentoring programs, both mentoring to support someone progress from a minority background, but also reverse mentoring, to get feedback from those backgrounds on what are the barriers and what is it like, to be in that community, and really fostering a culture of allyship in your organisation and acknowledging that you do have to champion that way forwards. Nothing will change unless you champion it through allies, that aren't in that community. It can't just be solved by the community itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, what's your perspective on this? How can procurement create a more inclusive environment to foster diversity? What actionable measures or strategies can professionals take, perhaps in their hiring practices, but I guess in particular as well, the retention plans?
Yeah, I think similar to what Dave said. I think first of all, I'm actually a real fan of, even though I've sort of studied like philosophy and social psychology, I'm actually a real fan of data, because I think what data does is it presents a sort of nice picture of, well, this is where we are at the moment in terms of our level of diversity. And then the data can say, hey, in some areas, we're doing some really good stuff. So you can celebrate the positives. But it also helps to say, what are our priorities going forward? And then you can use your data to say, right, where do we need to focus down? And then you have some actions around that. And I think what we know from the evidence is that there's a number of blockage points, if you like. So one's the access points. So what are the strategies around getting people in? And they could be the biases that we see in basic things like, job descriptions, person specs. So just doing a bit of a basic review of what's the sort of criteria which might act as a blockage for some groups would be quite a useful thing to do. And then I think once people are in, I think, Dave's mentioned the mentoring, which is quite useful actually. There's quite a lot of evidence to say that sponsorship in particular actually acts as a kind of a career enhancer. So, at the moment we're really advising our clients to not do, mentoring or allyship, because those things are really critical actually. But if you can identify future talent and then put into place things like sponsorship programs, that actually tends to have quite a profound effect. So they're the sorts of things that I would be looking at. But definitely, I'm also a fan of target. So not a fan of quotas, but I am a fan of, the principle effectively of what gets measured gets done. So if we have some target and then some accountability of that, we know it tends to drive action.
Yeah, on a previous podcast episode, we had Stephen Day on as a guest, and he spoke about this point about searching for talent in different places or using different ways. There's different thinking around how you can attract people in and nurture future talent. And I guess the salary survey findings, 58% of hiring managers globally are finding it difficult to find the right talent, which suggests there's a problem. What advice do you have, Dan, on this? Is it about finding new recruitment routes? Do you think we need to rethink our hiring practices entirely? Where would you say we should start?
I think we should rip up the process and start again.
Yes.
If you think about a hiring process, most people, they think that they know that experience is a determiner of future predictable performance, if that makes sense. So you think, okay, well, I tell you what, when we're looking for something, the usual thing in the job, have you got X amount of experience here? Demonstrate X and Y. What's really fascinating is we know that past experience in no shape or form is a predictor of future performance. Okay. So if we know that, why are we measuring that? And I think the more non-useful criteria that we put into person specifications and job descriptions, it obviously acts as a blocker to widening our talent pool. So I am completely confident in the concept that there is diverse and exceptional talent out there. I do not buy the argument at all that organizations or society is lacking talent. Don't get me wrong, there's a bigger conversation around the skills agenda. But I think the key blockage is how organizations think about what talent is and what they need. And I think we need a radical rethink of that. And I think one of the big things that organizations need to look for is this idea of kind of attitude and, in inverted commas, values fit, because we know that when you are hiring for attitude, values fit in a positive way as opposed to the negative way, you're much more likely to find creative, nurtured talent, etc. So I do feel that there's some radical thinking that needs to be done actually if we want to change the kind of landscape, because the landscape at the moment in most sectors and most fields is, well, the pace of change is painfully slow. And we can carry on to be painfully slow, or we can do something slightly more interesting. So that would be my advice, definitely.
Sounds like procurement needs to do the recruitment here, but Dave is totally over specifying what the need is at times. And as a woman, I sometimes look down a job description on what's essential and what's required, and I'll second guess myself with imposter syndrome on, "Oh, maybe I can do that, maybe I can't." So we need to have a real hard look at ourselves in terms of what is it that we're looking for and what is it that we're asking of people. I totally agree with you on that one, Danny. And Dave, do you, I- as I mean, my experience as a woman, but also someone with dyslexia, I feel that recruitment processes really are not geared up to get the best out of people. I don't know, and perhaps even the way we operate as businesses as well, meetings, etc. You're not really getting the best out of people, even once you get more diverse people in. Would you agree with some of that?
Fully agree. Yeah, I mean, you didn't mention AI. I mean, if we're a lot of big corporates now, all the CV filming's done by AI, and guess what? If you program an AI engine, it will cause you problems for tens of thousands of CVs. If you've got one biased recruitment manager filtering CVs, you've only got their CVs that are impacted. But imagine that. You've got your whole organization with a flawed AI filtering engine filtering out talent that happens to play golf, just because one of the CVs that you programmed it with plays golf. No, I fully agree. So I think it's all about building the network. Building the network. I'm a big advocate of building networks and getting out there. And I think if procurement directors want to recruit diverse talent, they need to really get out there and make themselves known to the communities that they want to attract. And then vice versa, people need to network, meet people, etc. Because increasingly the application engines are filtering out lots of great talent just based on the computer says no. And procurement is really it's a people industry, it's a relationship industry, and we need to shift to more relationship based networking communities, less cold kind of applications. Certainly, as a dyslexic myself, going through very long application forms with very extensive questions on experience and stuff, it is very off-putting, and I think particularly in the war on talent as well, a lot of good procurement people probably wouldn't even fill in the form if it takes too long to fill in. They'll just not bother because they've got about 3 or 4 other jobs on the go. So you need to be an employer of choice to get the best talent.
Absolutely. Hayes have said that to us as well with different podcasts we've done, is that, when you can pick and choose between so many jobs out in the market with buoyancy in the market, then you really have to take a hard look at yourself on, are you just creating those barriers that aren't necessary even to get applications over the line? Yeah. And particularly with young people, I think they'll be even less tolerant of it. We've probably got the war wounds and are used to it from over the years, but yeah, younger people in particular, I think, are like, what is going on here? one final question for you both. If listeners could go away from this podcast and do one thing to foster a more inclusive environment in their team or their hiring practices, what would it be? Just one practical suggestion from each of you would be fantastic. Dan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to be slightly cheeky and give you two, actually, if that's all right. I
Go
think,
for it.
I
Yeah.
think, I think one on the hiring, diverse talent is the job design process that we've just talked about. I think just rip it up and start again. And to Dave's point, I think it's a really good point around, if people are having to go through all these kind of long application forms, they're just not going to bother. So reviewing that would be good. I think on the inclusion point, I think that's different. And I think it's actually, to be honest, I think it's something different. And I also think it's something very, very simple, which is just be mindful, whoever you are, of your everyday behaviors, because it's not the policy process which makes a difference, is how do you make me feel? So if I'm different, it's the feeling, the emotional side, which will be a determiner of, do I feel valued, welcome, and the rest of it. So I think just be mindful of making sure that your behaviors are really aligned to personal values and organizational values, which has that significant difference.
Great one. Dave.
Yeah, look at your recruitment. Look at your recruitment patterns. Some great points made by Dan. Looking at the data of your current business, how it relates to the society of your customers that you're serving and society as a whole. Is it aligned? Is it not aligned? Why is it not aligned? Look at the seniority in your organisation. Foster a 360-degree feedback culture. So getting feedback anonymously from a cross section of people that you interact with in the work environment, very powerful. And also looking at rolling out workshops and training across your team. So inclusive leadership, microaggressions, making people aware of microaggressions, making people aware of unconscious bias. There's a lot of stuff, but I think the main advice I can give is, if you're not already, just get started, because doing something is a lot better than doing nothing on this whole topic. And don't be scared because it's so big. Don't be put off by getting started because you feel daunted by the breadth of it. It's getting increasingly complicated, but tackling just one small part of it is a massive way forwards.
Yeah, no, and to your point earlier as well, like don't be afraid of sometimes getting it wrong. Um, you know, action and maybe making the odd mistake is much better than taking no action at all. Sound advice, thank you. And back to where I said at the beginning of my intro, I think we have such broad skill sets required in procurement roles, in different roles, from analysts and crunching data to, like you say, Dave, that relationship management skills that people need. There are tons of procurement superpowers in really diverse people out there just waiting to be unlocked. So yeah, I'd encourage all organisations to go out there and do something about it. Thank you both for sharing your insight. Great to have you on. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
One last point before I go. The CIPS Salary Survey for 2025 is live, so please check out the link in the description and complete this year's survey. The more responses we get, the richer the information that we'll be able to deliver up to you. And I absolutely promise that we've worked really hard on reducing the number of questions this year, so it shouldn't take you so long to complete it. So please, please, please go in there and complete this year's survey. So that's it for this episode of Futures. Thank you for joining us. For any new listeners out there, be sure to check out our previous podcasts. We've had fantastic feedback so far, so please do continue to rate and review us on your favourite podcast platform. This podcast has been brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. For more information on CIPS, head over to cips.org, where you can find out more about our up-and-coming events, excellent training opportunities and much more. For now though, that's it from us. See you next time.